Today we're doing a head-to-head comparison of two of the best super shoes of 2023. We have the Saucony Endorphin Elite versus the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro. Let's get into it. Alright guys, here's how this is going to work. I have reviewed both of these shoes separately, and to start this off we are going to be going over some of the specs just so you can compare, and if you want to go back and view my individual reviews of each of the shoes, I would appreciate it. But otherwise, after we go over the specs, I'm going to be talking about the differences in these shoes and how they actually feel when you're running in them. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to make a recommendation, but I think by the time we're done, you're going to be able to figure out which of these super shoes, the Saucony Endorphin Elite or the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro, which of them's going to work best for you. Let's start off with price. The Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro will cost you $250. The Saucony Endorphin Elite will cost you $275. The Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro has 39mm in the heel, 35mm in the forefoot for a 4mm drop. The Saucony Endorphin Elite has 39.5mm in the heel, 31.5 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. So this is something that you are going to have to think about as far as your own personal preference. What kind of drop do you like to run fast in? 4mm, 8mm. Now I gotta tell you, whenever I review shoes that have high drops, and I think a high drop is anything from 8 up, I always get someone saying, wow, I only like lower drop shoes. Typically that isn't the case for me. Generally speaking, high drop shoes feel better for me. But if I was to only go by viewer comments, low drop is vastly more popular. So remember, Mizuno 4mm, Saucony 8mm. Now let's talk about weight. Every gram increase in weight is an extra gram that we have to carry with us through our race. And by the way, these are race day shoes. And when I say race day shoes, these are long distance race day shoes. They are going to excel at longer distances. I'm talking half marathon to full marathon. Both of these are going to work well at the 5K, 10K, but as a design standpoint, these are long distance shoes, half to full marathon. And in the US men's size 9, the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro tips the scale at 7.9 ounces or 224 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 13 tips the scale at 9.8 ounces or 278 grams. It's definitely a light shoe. However, the Saucony Endorphin Elite in a US men's size 9 tips the scale at 7.2 ounces or 204 grams. So in the US men's size 9, the Endorphin Elite weighs 20 grams less than the Wave Rebellion Pro. And the Endorphin Elite in my size, a US men's size 13, tips the scale at 8.8 ounces or 250 grams, which is 28 grams lighter than the Wave Rebellion Pro or 10% lighter. Now remember, these are just numbers. You do have to get these shoes on your feet to really notice a difference. And when I am holding both of them like this, yeah, the Wave Rebellion Pro does feel a tad heavier, but when they're on my feet, I don't notice the 28 gram weight increase in the Wave Rebellion Pro. So for me, at least, feeling wise, it's a negligible weight difference. The designs of the upper on both these shoes are pretty different, but let's start with the Wave Rebellion Pro, and we can see that we have a more traditional heel collar area as far as the padding goes. There isn't a lot of padding, but there is some. I'd say it's a race day shoe amount of padding around the heel collar, and that's just going to make it feel soft against your ankle. The Wave Rebellion Pro does have a very small heel counter, giving a little more rigidity back here, which is going to stop the shoe from sliding around if you suffer from heel slip. I don't seem to, but I do like it when a shoe has a little bit of heel counter. It just feels more comfortable putting my foot in. Now the upper on the Wave Rebellion Pro is very light. It doesn't look very light in this colorway, but there are lots of laser cut holes all the way around, so this shoe is very ventilated. We have some overlays just along the eyelet chain, this overlay of the Mizuno Running Bird logo just giving a little structure to the upper, and then an underlay right on the toe box just to keep that above your foot, giving your toes that feeling of space, you know, so they can splay out a little bit when they're in the shoe. The laces, there's really nothing special about the laces. They do the job. The tongue is not gusseted, but there are 2 lace loops right on the front of the tongue. Now the tongue on the Wave Rebellion Pro is very, very thin, and I haven't had any tongue slippage in this shoe. However, I have noticed that when I put my foot into the Wave Rebellion Pro, I do have to be paying attention so the sides of the tongue don't kind of wrap up on top of my foot, so then I've got like a double layer of tongue. That can be a bit annoying. But aside from that, if I spend an extra 10 seconds ensuring that the shoe is on my foot how it's supposed to be, the tongue isn't lapped over, the Wave Rebellion Pro feels fantastic on my foot. Very comfortable upper. I get a good lockdown across the top of my foot. The volume in the upper of the Wave Rebellion Pro is perfect for my foot. Now look, I think I may have a slightly narrower foot than average, but the Wave Rebellion Pro fits me extremely well, and it doesn't make me feel like my foot is overly narrow. Okay, let's go to the Endorphin Elite next, and just by looking at it, you can see, because it's a lighter color mainly, that there is a lot going on. But I think we are going to start the same place that we started with the Wave Rebellion Pro, and that's with the heel heel collar. Now the heel collar is completely different from the Wave Rebellion Pro. You can look at it here and just see how thin it is. It's like a very thin piece of material. There is absolutely no padding. It's just the material. And look at this. Look, when I do this, I can like crunch it down. There is absolutely nothing there. There is no heel counter whatsoever. This is just a thin piece of material. It's kind of like a thin knit. But then we do have this band that comes around, which you can see better if I pull down the heel. And this here goes against the back of your heel on top of the knit, and it actually gives a surprisingly good heel lock. And even though there is no heel counter, at least no traditional heel counter, no piece of plastic or cardboard inside the back of the shoe, this little heel loop right on the back does an astounding job at holding my heel in place in the Endorphin Elite. Now there is a little bit of padding right here on the back which goes against the back of your heel. I actually found these shoes to be very comfortable, despite the lack of padding around the whole heel collar. Now if we look at the back, we've got this knit material and it kind of comes into a mesh material. And just like the Wave Rebellion Pro, the Endorphin Elite is extremely breathable, except there's a little more going on with the Endorphin Elite as far as overlays. We've got this band, which really is the most noticeable thing about this shoe, and this band wraps from the midfoot around the laces all the way around the bottom, comes underneath the carbon fiber plate, and then wraps up the medial side here. We've got this heel to toe Saucony logo coming right around here. We've got some overlays over the eyelet chains, and then we have an overlay right around the toe box, doing the same thing as the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro, in that it just keeps that toe box above your toes so the material isn't smothering your feet. Now remember, the last thing we talked about with the Wave Rebellion Pro was the volume, and by volume I mean the amount of space I have inside the shoe. And I just want you to look at the eyelet chain right here on the Endorphin Elite. Let me now hold up the Wave Rebellion Pro 2, and you can see that on the Endorphin Elite the eyelet chains are very close together, whereas on the Wave Rebellion Pro they are a little further apart. Now I already said that the Wave Rebellion Pro has a nice volume. My foot fits into it nicely. However, on the Endorphin Elite, I just find the volume in the shoe is just a little too much for my foot. Now, I am a US men's size 13, and except for these eyelet chains being too close together, I am pretty confident that I am a US men's size 13. The shoe doesn't feel big anywhere else. My foot fits nicely in the shoe. I have an appropriate amount of space at the end, but the volume is just a little big. I think perhaps I could go down to a 12.5, although it may be tight in other places, but I think that may fix the amount of volume, or maybe not. I'm probably not going to spend $275 in order to buy a half size down just to see if it fits me a little better. But saying that, I actually didn't notice a problem having that much volume. And even though these eyelet chains are very close together here at the front of the shoe, they do widen out a little bit as it gets to my ankle. And down here at the bottom of the eyelet chain, there is still no bunching. So even though it looks a little funny on my pair of shoes, it doesn't affect me negatively. Same with the Wave Rebellion Pro. The laces on the Endorphin Elite are nothing to write home about. They do the job they're supposed to do. The tongue is double gusseted. It is gusseted on both sides, which I like. And let me hold this up. This tongue is very ventilated. It is just filled with holes. No one is going to accuse the Endorphin Elite of being a warm shoe. In fact, I go so far as to say that this shoe cannot be worn in super cold temperatures just because it offers no protection from the elements. But when we're racing, we're generating a lot of heat. We want that heat to dissipate, and it's definitely going to do that in the Endorphin Elite. Like the Wave Rebellion Pro, the tongue on the Endorphin Elite is very, very thin. It's almost like a faux suede material. There is no padding along the tongue, so the tongue is not going to protect the top of your foot from any lace bite if you often experience that on your shoes. However, even though there is no padding on the tongue, I didn't experience any lace bite, and the tongue and the laces and the lockdown all fit pretty well until you look too closely. Then you see that it's really not fitting, but it feels like it is. Okay, let's talk about the main thing. The main thing about these shoes that actually make them super is the foams. Let's start with the Wave Rebellion Pro. Now Mizuno is using two foams on the Wave Rebellion Pro. We have Mizuno Energy Light Plus on the top and the Mizuno Energy Light on the bottom. And in between these two foams is their carbon infused wave plate. And if we look on the bottom, there is this very distinctive cutout where you get a good glimpse of the wave plate right through the foam. Now we all know by now that what makes a super shoe super is not the plate on its own, it's not the foam on its own, but it's the combination of the foam and the plate. And in combination, Mizuno's carbon infused nylon wave plate works incredibly well with this foam. While we're talking about the foam, let's just look at the geometry of the shoe. We can see this distinctive heel bevel right here, and then a pretty severe toe spring, and you can pretty much tell how this shoe is going to ride just by looking at it. This shoe is designed for the midfoot strikers to just roll forward and be propelled forward on their way to hopefully running a PR. All this foam on the Wave Rebellion Pro provides a lot of cushioning. This shoe feels soft yet responsive under your foot. But hold on, let's talk about the Endorphin Elite foam, then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the ride. So the Saucony Endorphin Elite is using a brand new foam. It is the most responsive foam that Saucony has ever made. It is Power Run HG. And the Power Run HG foam, it's a little firmer feeling than the Wave Rebellion Pro. So while the Wave Rebellion Pro kind of feels like a traditional super shoe, the Saucony Endorphin Elite feels just a little firmer than that. So usually we have a very soft feeling in a super shoe, we have a slightly firmer feeling with the Endorphin Elite, which is not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of people out there that prefer a firmer ride. You can see on my colorway we've got two colors of foam. We've got this green foam right on the top, and then we've got the white Power Run HG on the bottom. And when you put your foot into the Endorphin Elite, it does sink down a little further than this green foam that you can see on the outside. And because your foot sits lower than the top of the foam, it does feel like the shoe is just a little more wrapped around your foot. Now, okay, that's true in a lot of cases. In a lot of cases, your foot does sit down into the foam. And on the Wave Rebellion Pro, it does that too. However, not to the extent that it does in the Endorphin Elite. So even though we have very similar stack heights in these shoes, the Endorphin Elite just feels a little more stable at speed and going around corners than the Wave Rebellion Pro does. I would say the Wave Rebellion Pro is a lot like some other very popular super shoes out there in that it really excels at running in a straight line. And at least for me, when I start running around corners, it does tend to feel just a little unstable. Now look, I'm not saying that this is a super firm base that just sticks to the road when you're rounding corners and you could run an obstacle course in the Endorphin Elite. No, that feeling of instability when you go around corners is still there in the Endorphin Elite. However, the Wave Rebellion Pro just feels a little less stable, if that makes sense. Look, when you're riding on top of almost 40 millimeters of foam, it's very difficult to feel like you're not running on stilts. But the Endorphin Elite, just a little more stable. Let's briefly look at the bottom of these shoes, and we can see on the Endorphin Elite, we've got a good amount of coverage on the forefoot. We've got some strategically placed rubber on the lateral heel edge, which is where most people hit. And then we've got exposed foam on the medial side of the heel. Now, it's very difficult for you guys to see just by looking at this screen right now, but the rubber on the Endorphin Elite is very thin. In contrast to Mizuno's Wave Rebellion Pro, look at this amount of outsole rubber. Now, Mizuno is using their G3 outsole rubber. It is very sticky, and there is quite a lot of it here. Now look, Mizuno could have shaved off a couple of grams, bringing it a little closer to the weight of the Endorphin Elite, but perhaps by doing that, they would have sacrificed the longevity of this shoe. So if you are someone that likes to keep your super shoes for as long as possible, and let's be honest, most of us out there want to keep our super shoes. When we're paying this amount of money, it's nice if they last more than a couple of races. And the Wave Rebellion Pro is going to last you a lot longer. And I think that is an obvious statement just looking at the bottom. There is remarkably more rubber and firmer rubber compound on the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro than there is on the Saucony Endorphin Elite. Okay, let's talk about ride. So, when I first put on the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro and I was walking around the house before I'd even taken it out for a run, I gotta say that this is a different shoe. It's a different feeling shoe than probably anything you've ever run in before. And it does take a little bit of getting used to. In contrast to the Endorphin Elite, when you put this shoe on your foot, it feels like anything that came before it. Like it just feels like a normal shoe, right? Now with the Wave Rebellion Pro, it's not a walking shoe, so I don't want you to judge it by walking around the house. Now when you start running, there is still a feeling that there is a little bit of foam right underneath your arch, right? There's just something there, giving a little bit of pressure. And then when you start to run, that feeling goes away very quickly. It took me maybe a mile before I stopped thinking about it. And in my testing phase of the Wave Rebellion Pro, I did run some easy miles in this shoe. Mostly I was drawn to this shoe for my faster workouts, my tempo runs, my intervals. But even when I'm running intervals, I do have to run a warm up, then I have to run the easy sections of the intervals, and then I usually run a couple of miles to cool down after. But the Wave Rebellion Pro really comes alive when you start picking up the pace. When you start running at that tempo effort, or when you're running intervals, you naturally move a little forward where your foot strikes the ground. And that is what makes the shoe really feel like a super shoe. And my friends, this shoe really does feel like it is propelling you forward. You don't get that same feeling when you're running easy. Maybe that is a Captain Obvious statement, but I think it still needs to be said. I would say that this shoe is not for everyone. It's not for every runner, just because of the feeling of how good it feels going fast compared with what it feels like running slow. Move over to the Endorphin Elite. And again, this is a race day shoe. It definitely feels good when you pick up the pace. When you start landing forward, well, first of all, let me show you the toe spring on this shoe. It's pretty intense, isn't it? It just goes right up. And when you roll through, it just sends you forward and it feels pretty good. Just because the Power Run HG foam is a little firmer, you get a little more of a sensation of road feel. Now look, I'm not under any illusion that I'm actually getting road feel. There's still almost 40 millimeters of stack height in this shoe, but just the firmness makes me feel like I'm feeling the road a little more. The shoe is perfect at race day speeds. It really picks up the pace, it feels good. But what surprised me most is that this shoe also felt good when I was running easy. So when I was doing those warm-ups before my intervals, when I was doing the cool down, when I was on the downside of the intervals, I even took the Endorphin Elite out for a 20-mile long run, not at race pace, just out cruising, and it felt really good. So because of that part of my experiment and my testing, I think the Endorphin Elite is going to work for a wider range of runners than the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro. Now guys, if you have the opportunity to test both of these shoes, I highly recommend you take it. But let's be honest, most people generally don't. They're going to pick one. If you're going to pick on looks, you got to go with the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro. This thing just looks fire. I love everything about how this shoe looks. If perhaps you're going to buy a shoe, let's say you're buying a marathon shoe, and you know that you're going to be slowing down towards the end of your marathon, you're going to be heel striking a little more, I think maybe the Endorphin Elite is going to work a little better for you. However, if you are a speed demon, and I'm not going to put any specific speeds on that when I say speed demon, because speed is all relative to each of us. But let's say you land a little more midfoot to forefoot, and you can maintain that midfoot to forefoot four strike throughout the distance of your race, then I would definitely recommend the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro over the Endorphin Elite. I would even say that if you are going to race 5K, 10K, half marathon, I would go with the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro, and only because the distance of the marathon, because of all the intricacies of a marathon, if you tend to get a little lazy towards the end of a marathon and your gait suffers and your foot strike suffers, I think the Endorphin Elite is going to be a little more forgiving for you. So clearly I am unable to give a firm recommendation because there are so many nuances involved. I think the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro feels like a faster shoe. When you're running fast, just the geometry, the plate makes it feel like the shoe is actually moving you forward more so than the Endorphin Elite. However, I've got to say that I am actually a fan of the slightly firmer Power Run HG. When I first put this shoe on my foot, I wasn't sure if I really liked it, but it turns out I do. Alright guys, if you have any questions on either the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro or the Saucony Endorphin Elite, go ahead and drop a comment. Also, drop a comment and let me know what your race day shoe of choice is. My name's Matt. This has been my comparison between Mizuno's Wave Rebellion Pro and Saucony's Endorphin Elite. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.